The night I won the biggest award of my career, my mother looked at me and said it was stupid. She did not clap, she did not smile. She picked up her purse, turned to my father, and told him they were going to dinner to celebrate something that actually mattered. I stood there holding a gold plaque with my name engraved on it, feeling smaller than I had ever felt in my 30 years of life. But what she did not know was that night would change everything. Before I tell you what happened next, tell me where you are watching from. Drop your state in the comments. My name is Evelyn Harper, and this is the night I stopped chasing my mother approval and started rewriting my future forever. I am 30 years old, and for as long as I can remember, I have been trying to earn a kind of approval that always seemed just out of reach. I grew up in a quiet suburb outside Columbus, Ohio, in a house that looked perfect from the outside. My father worked long hours as a financial consultant. My mother managed everything else with precision. She believed in achievement, but only the kind she respected: numbers, status, titles that impressed her friends at church luncheons and neighborhood gatherings. I chose a different path. I built a career in community development, helping small towns secure grants and funding for schools, libraries, and youth programs. It was not flashy. It did not come with luxury cars or country club memberships. But it mattered. At least it mattered to me. Over the past 5 years, I worked on a statewide initiative that revitalized struggling public libraries. We secured funding, upgraded technology, and created literacy programs for families who needed them most. The award I received that night was from the State Civic Leadership Council. It recognized innovative impact in underserved communities. When they called my name on that stage, I felt something I had never felt before. I felt seen. I felt proud. I felt like all the late nights, rejected proposals, and endless presentations had finally led somewhere meaningful. I scanned the audience for my parents. My father was clapping, his smile small but sincere. My mother's face was unreadable. After the ceremony, people came up to congratulate me. Local reporters asked questions. A city council member shook my hand and told me my work was changing lives. I wanted my mother to hear that. I wanted her to absorb it, to finally understand that impact does not have to be loud to be powerful. Instead, when we stepped outside the venue, she adjusted her coat and said, "It is a nice plaque, but it is not exactly groundbreaking. It is just libraries. Just libraries." The words stayed suspended in the air between us. I felt my chest tighten, but I kept my voice steady. I explained the scale of the program, the thousands of children who now had access to updated resources. She nodded politely, then said she and my father had reservations at a steakhouse downtown. She added that they did not want to lose the table. She told me I could join if I wanted, but her tone made it clear that the evening was not about me. It was about my father closing a major client deal earlier that week. I watched them walk toward the parking garage together. My father glanced back at me as if he wanted to say something more, but he followed her. I stood alone on the sidewalk, the award heavy in my hands. The city lights reflected off the metal surface, and for a moment, I questioned everything. Maybe she was right. Maybe what I did was small. Maybe I had built my entire identity around something that did not matter in the world she valued. But deep down, beneath the doubt, something else was forming. It was quiet, it was steady, and it was new. I did not go home that night. Instead, I walked 3 blocks away from the venue and sat inside my car with the engine off. The city felt louder than usual, even though it was close to midnight. I placed the award on the passenger seat and stared at my name engraved beneath the title. For a long time, I replayed my mother's words in my head. It is just libraries. It is not groundbreaking. It is small. I realized something uncomfortable in that silence. My entire career had been built on proving her wrong. Every grant proposal, every public presentation, every late night had carried an invisible audience of one. I wanted her to say she was proud. I wanted her to tell her friends that her daughter was doing meaningful work. I wanted to feel chosen. Instead, I felt dismissed. When I finally drove home, my apartment felt different. It felt temporary, like a waiting room. I placed the award on my kitchen counter and turned on the overhead light. The metal reflected against the white cabinets. It was beautiful. It was earned, yet her voice kept trying to shrink it. Around 1 in the morning, my phone buzzed. It was a notification from social media. A local journalist had posted a photo of me holding the award. The caption highlighted the statewide impact of our library initiative and tagged several state officials. The post was already gaining attention. Comments were pouring in from educators, parents, and nonprofit leaders. People were thanking me. They were sharing stories about how the program helped their communities. Then I saw something that shifted everything. A verified account had reshared the post. It belonged to the Lieutenant Governor of Ohio. He praised the initiative and mentioned that innovative civic leaders like me were exactly what the state needed moving forward. My heart started racing. Not because of the recognition, but because I saw possibility. This was not just about a plaque anymore. This was visibility. It was influence. It was leverage. The next morning, I woke up to 3 missed calls from an unfamiliar number. I returned the call, and a calm professional voice introduced herself as a representative from a national foundation focused on educational equity. She had seen the coverage online. She wanted to discuss expanding our model to other states. She asked if I would be available for a virtual meeting later that week. I agreed, trying to keep my voice steady. That afternoon, my mother texted me. She wrote that dinner had gone well. She added that my father client was impressed with the restaurant choice. There was no mention of my award, no acknowledgement of the growing attention around my work. For the first time in my life, I did not feel the urge to correct her or seek her validation. I felt detached, calm, strategic. Because while she was celebrating a closed deal over steak and polished silverware, doors were quietly opening for me across the country. And the most powerful part was this. She had no idea. By the end of that week, my calendar looked completely different from what it had looked like a month earlier. The National Foundation scheduled a formal presentation. 2 state representatives requested meetings to discuss how our library model could integrate with workforce development programs. A regional news outlet asked for a long-form interview about civic innovation. Everything that once felt invisible was suddenly visible. I prepared carefully. Not to impress my mother. Not to prove anything to anyone. I prepared because I finally understood the scale of what I had built. During the virtual meeting with the Foundation Board, I presented data, long-term projections, and testimonials from families whose children now had access to modern resources. I explained how digital literacy programs in rural towns were increasing graduation rates. I spoke clearly. I did not rush. I did not minimize my impact. At the end of the presentation, the board chair thanked me and said something that stayed with me. He said, "This is not small work. This is structural change." Structural change. 2 weeks later, they offered a multi-state expansion grant under my leadership. It was more funding than I had ever managed before. It meant hiring teams. It meant building partnerships in at least 5 additional states. It meant stepping into a national spotlight. The same evening I signed the preliminary agreement. My parents invited me to dinner at their house. My mother said she wanted to discuss something important. When I arrived, the table was set with careful detail. She poured iced tea and asked polite questions about my week. For a moment, it felt almost normal. Then she mentioned that a family friend's son had been promoted to vice president at a major firm in Chicago. She described his salary, his benefits, his travel schedule. She looked at me and asked if I had ever considered transitioning into something more stable and prestigious. I listened without interrupting. For years, that conversation would have made me defensive. It would have made me justify my choices. This time, I stayed calm. When she finished, I told her about the expansion grant. I explained the scale, the funding, the states involved, the team I would be building. She blinked slowly. My father leaned forward, clearly surprised. He asked questions about the budget size and the timeline. I answered each one directly. I did not exaggerate. I did not downplay. I simply stated the facts. There was a brief silence at the table. My mother adjusted her napkin and said it sounded ambitious. She added that she hoped I would not overextend myself. Her tone was measured, but something had shifted. She was no longer dismissing. She was calculating. For the first time, I saw that her opinion did not control the room. My results did. And in that moment, I understood something deeper. The dinner she chose over my award had been about what she valued. The future I was building was about what I valued. Those two things were no longer competing, they were separating. 3 months later, I stood on a stage again, but this time it was not a state ceremony. It was a national education summit in Washington, D.C. Leaders from multiple states attended. Policy advisors, nonprofit executives, and media representatives filled the ballroom. Behind me on a large screen was a map highlighting the 5 new states where our library transformation model had already launched. When I began speaking, I did not feel the nervous need to impress anyone. I felt grounded. I talked about access. I talked about equity. I talked about how small community investments create long-term economic stability. I shared stories of students who completed digital certification programs inside libraries that once had outdated computers and empty shelves. I explained how rural communities were now hosting career workshops inside spaces that used to sit silent. The applause at the end was not polite. It was sustained. Later that evening, my phone filled with messages. Colleagues congratulated me. State officials expressed interest in partnerships. A national news segment featured a short clip of my speech. Then my mother called. Her voice sounded different. Softer. She said she had seen the coverage. She said neighbors had mentioned it. She told me she had not realized how extensive the program had become. There was a pause before she added that she was proud of my dedication. In the past, those words would have felt like oxygen. That night, they felt steady, but not necessary. I thanked her. I told her I appreciated it. I did not rush to fill the silence. After we ended the call, I sat alone in my hotel room overlooking the city lights. I thought back to the night she called my award stupid and left for dinner. I remembered how small I felt standing on that sidewalk. I remembered questioning whether my work mattered. What changed was not her opinion. What changed was my focus. The moment I stopped chasing validation and started building leverage, everything shifted. Recognition followed impact. Influence followed consistency. A week later, I hosted a formal launch event in one of the newly renovated libraries in Kentucky. Families filled the room. Children explored updated learning stations. Community leaders thanked our team for investing in their town. My father attended quietly and shook my hand at the end. He told me he respected what I had built. My mother stood near the back observing. When she approached me, she did not minimize. She did not compare. She simply said she had underestimated the scale of my vision. I smiled and told her something I finally understood at 30 years old. Vision does not need approval to grow. It needs commitment. The plaque from that first award still sits on my office shelf. Not as proof for her. Not as proof for anyone else. It reminds me of the night everything looked small from the outside, and the night I decided it was not small at all.